My parents cut me off after seeing that my wife cheated on me with better brother. There are moments in life that shatter everything you thought you knew. Moments that change you forever. For me, that moment came when I walked into my own home and found my wife in bed with my brother. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but recent events have forced me to relive the nightmare. And now, as the people who betrayed me are crawling back, expecting me to fix the mess they created, I need to remind myself why I walked away in the first place. I had been married to Julie for 8 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. She was charming, dependable, and the kind of woman people would take one look at and say, "Wow, he's lucky." And for years, I believed that too. Growing up, I had always been the responsible one in my family. My parents praised me for being dependable, for making smart choices, for working hard and setting a good example. They told me I'd make a great husband one day because I was mature and level-headed. And then there was Luke, my younger brother, the golden child. Luke was the fun one, the charming one, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and have everyone wrapped around his finger in minutes. My parents adored him. Everyone did. He was the life of the party, the kind of guy who could get away with anything. And apparently, that included sleeping with his brother's wife. I remember the day I found out like it was yesterday. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I had left work early because I wasn't feeling well, just a bad headache, nothing serious. I thought I'd go home, take a nap, and wake up feeling better. But when I walked through the front door, something felt off. The house was too quiet. Julie's car was in the driveway, but the TV wasn't on. No music was playing. It was just silence. Then I saw it, Luke's duffel bag sitting in the living room. At first, I told myself he must have just come over to visit. Maybe they were having coffee in the kitchen, catching up. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then I heard voices, coming from our bedroom. My heart pounded as I walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last. A voice in my head screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I never saw any of this. But I couldn't. I opened the door, and there they were. Julie, my wife, Luke, my brother, in my bed. I'll never forget the look on their faces when they saw me standing there. Julie's eyes widened in shock. Luke's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. They were caught. No excuses. No explanations. Just betrayal. The next few minutes were a blur. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember if I yelled or if I just stood there, frozen in place. All I know is that something inside me broke that day. Something I could never put back together. I walked out of that house with whatever I could grab and didn't look back. That should have been the worst of it. But somehow, what happened next was even more painful. When I reached out to my parents, expecting them to support me through the worst moment of my life, I was met with absolute indifference. "Marriage is complicated," my mom said. "Maybe you pushed Julie away without realizing it." "Luke is young," my dad added. "You can't blame him for following his heart." I stared at them, barely able to process what I was hearing. They weren't angry at Luke. They weren't disgusted by what he had done. They were defending him, as if I was the one who had somehow driven Julie into his arms. Julie's parents weren't any better. I had been close to them for years, spent holidays at their house, helped out whenever they needed. I thought they saw me as family. But the second they heard the news, they cut me off without hesitation. "Luke is just such a great guy," Julie's mom told me over the phone. "We can see why she fell for him." Like it was nothing. Like 8 years of marriage had meant nothing. Within a week, both families had fully sided with Julie and Luke. I was completely alone. The divorce process was quick and brutal. I could have fought for more, but I didn't want anything that reminded me of them. I left behind the house, the furniture, everything. I packed a few essentials, signed the papers, and walked away from the life I had built. At the time, I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal or the realization that I had never really mattered to my family. I had been replaced, like I was disposable, like my entire existence could be erased and rewritten to fit their version of reality. And so, I disappeared. I moved into a tiny apartment, cut off all contact, and tried to rebuild from nothing. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was the only way to survive. Walking away from my marriage was painful. Walking away from my entire family was devastating. But in the end, I had no choice. After the divorce, I reached out to my parents one last time. A part of me, some broken, desperate part, still hoped that they would come to their senses, that they would realize how much they had hurt me and finally give me the support I needed. But when I called them, I was met with silence. My mother barely let me speak before cutting me off. "Ashley, we don't want to take sides," she said, her voice tired, as if I was the one causing trouble. I nearly dropped the phone. "Not taking sides?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You're literally having dinner with Luke and Julie every weekend. You're treating them like a happily married couple while I'm sitting here completely alone." My father sighed heavily, like I was exhausting him. "Son, you can't hold onto this anger forever. Julie and Luke didn't mean to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened." As if I had simply tripped over my own bad luck. As if Luke hadn't made a conscious choice to betray me. As if Julie hadn't knowingly destroyed our marriage. And now, my own parents were telling me to just get over it. That was the moment I knew. I was nothing to them. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had no support system. No one checking in on me. No one calling to make sure I was okay. For 8 years, Julie and I had built a life together. We had mutual friends, a social circle, people we spent holidays and birthdays with. But after the divorce, silence. It was like I had never existed. At first, I thought people were just keeping their distance. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they were giving me space. But then, I started seeing the truth. Luke and Julie had rewritten the story. They had painted me as the villain. In their version of events, I was the problem. I was bitter. I was unstable. Luke wasn't a home-wrecking brother. He was a hero, the man who had saved Julie from a marriage that wasn't working. And I was just the angry ex-husband who couldn't move on. One day, I ran into an old friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We chatted for a bit, catching up, and then she casually said something that nearly made my blood run cold. "I saw Julie and Luke the other day," she said with a smile. "They seem so happy together. It's nice to see things worked out for them after everything." After everything? I stared at her, my jaw tightening. Worked out for them? I echoed. "You mean after they destroyed my marriage?" Her face paled. "Oh, I mean, that's not what I heard. I thought you and Julie had already been having problems before Luke came into the picture." And there it was. The lie. The excuse. Julie and Luke had made sure to rewrite history in a way that absolved them of any blame. It didn't matter what I had been through. It didn't matter how much I had suffered. To everyone else, their version of events was all that mattered. I tried one last time to reach out to my parents. I showed up at their house unannounced, hoping, praying, that maybe, just maybe, seeing me in person would remind them that I was still their son. When my mom opened the door, I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't happy to see me. "Ashley," she said, crossing her arms, "you should have called." I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you and Dad. Please." She let me inside, but I could feel the tension in the air. My father was sitting in the living room, flipping through a newspaper like my presence was an inconvenience. I sat down across from them, my hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. "Why?" I finally asked. "Why did you choose them over me?" My father sighed, setting the newspaper down. "Son, we didn't choose anyone. You're the one who walked away." I laughed bitterly. "I walked away? You think I had a choice? You let Luke take everything from me. My wife, my family, my friends, and then you just sat back and acted like I was the problem." My mother rubbed her temples, clearly growing impatient. "Ashley, we can't undo what happened. But you need to stop making this harder on everyone. Luke and Julie are happy. Why can't you just accept that?" Accept it? I had to leave before I said something I'd regret. I walked out of my childhood home knowing that my parents were gone. Not physically, not in a way that people mourn, but they were gone from my life. Because they chose to be. That was the day I stopped trying. I deleted their numbers. I removed them from my social media. I erased every connection I had with them. Because I finally understood the truth. I was disposable to them. I had always been the responsible one, the reliable one. the boring one who followed the rules and made sacrifices for the sake of others. But the second they had an opportunity to replace me with someone they liked better, they did. And I was done being their afterthought. I spent the next year rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. I had nothing. No family. No social circle. No one to lean on when the nights felt too long and the loneliness was unbearable. But I did it anyway. I threw myself into work. I met new people. People who didn't know Luke or Julie. People who didn't see me as the villain in someone else's story. And slowly, piece by piece, I started finding myself again. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to live up to someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't good enough. I was living for me. And for the first time, that was enough. Waking up alone in my tiny apartment every morning should have felt empty. I had spent years surrounded by people, family, friends, a wife who had once claimed to love me. And yet, despite losing all of that, for the first time in a long time, I felt something strange. Relief. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the dependable one, the son who never caused problems, the husband who never let his wife down. And for what? To be discarded, to be replaced, to be made to feel like I never mattered in the first place. But now, in this small, quiet space, I had something I never had before. Control. No one could tell me what to do. No one could guilt-trip me into pretending that everything was fine. No one could force me to smile while my brother lived the life that should have been mine. For the first time, I was free. But rebuilding wasn't easy. I had to start from scratch. I spent most of my time at work, staying late, taking extra shifts, anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the past. When I wasn't working, I was alone, trying to figure out who I was outside of being someone's son, someone's husband, someone's placeholder. At first, I didn't trust anyone. The betrayal had cut so deep that even casual conversations felt like landmines waiting to explode. When coworkers invited me out for drinks, I found myself hesitating. When neighbors tried to make small talk, I gave short answers. I had been burned so badly that letting people in felt dangerous. But, little by little, I started letting my guard down. There was an older couple who lived in the apartment next to mine, Mr. and Mrs. Gallagher. They reminded me of the kind of parents I had always wished for. Warm, kind, genuinely interested in how I was doing. One day, Mrs. Gallagher knocked on my door with a plate of homemade cookies. "You're too thin," she said, pushing them into my hands. "You need to eat something that wasn't microwaved." I didn't have the heart to tell her I barely had an appetite, but I ate the cookies anyway. And for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually cared. Slowly, I started making new friends. Not the kind of people who had known me before, who had heard Julie and Luke's version of events. New people. People who only knew me as Ashley, not as the guy whose wife cheated with his brother. There was Nathan, a coworker who had been persistent about getting me to go out for drinks after work. At first, I declined every invitation. But one Friday, I finally said yes. I had forgotten what it felt like to laugh, to have a normal conversation, to sit in a bar and talk about anything other than betrayal and family dysfunction. And in that moment, surrounded by people who didn't see me as broken, I realized something. I was healing. I had spent so long believing that I needed my family, that I needed Julie, that I needed the approval of people who had never really valued me in the first place. But I didn't. I was learning how to be okay on my own. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. 1 year later, by the time a full year had passed, I was in a completely different place. I had moved into a better apartment, one that felt like a fresh start. I had a solid group of new friends, people who supported me without strings attached. I had even started dating again, something I never thought I'd be ready for. It wasn't anything serious yet, but just putting myself out there felt like a win. Most importantly, I had no contact with my family. No calls, no texts, no guilt trips. For 12 months, my phone had been silent, and it was the best silence I had ever known. I had escaped them, or at least I thought I had. Then, out of nowhere, one afternoon, I was finishing up at work when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. Ashley, I felt my entire body tense. It was my mother. It's been so long, she said, her voice almost hesitant. How have you been? I should have hung up. I should have blocked the number on the spot. But a part of me, a small, foolish part, still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was calling to make things right. I'm fine, I said, my voice cold. What do you want? She hesitated. Honey, things have been difficult. We miss you. I nearly laughed. They miss me? The same people who had cut me out of their lives without a second thought? The same people who had sided with the people who betrayed me? Why are you really calling? I asked. And then, she said the words that made my stomach turn. Julie needs you. Julie needs you. The words rang in my ears like a sick joke. I gripped my phone, barely able to contain my disbelief. What? I finally said. My mother sighed like this was all some minor inconvenience for her. Julie's been going through a really rough time since Luke left. She's struggling. And well, we think it's time for you to step up. I almost dropped my phone. Step up? The same woman who destroyed my life. The same brother who took everything from me. Now that things had fallen apart for them, I was supposed to step up? Are you serious right now? I said, my voice cold. Ashley, listen, she continued. Luke made a mistake. He wasn't ready for marriage, and he left Julie in a really bad place. She needs stability. And after everything, we thought maybe. You thought what? I snapped. That I'd just go running back like some backup plan? That I'd pretend none of this ever happened? It's not like that, she insisted, but her voice wavered. It's just, family forgives, Ashley. And Julie realizes now that she made a mistake. Don't you think it's time to move forward? I let out a hollow laugh. Move forward? After they threw me away like garbage? After Luke got bored and ran off, and now suddenly they wanted me back? It wasn't about me. It was never about me. Julie wasn't calling because she regretted what she had done. She was calling because she was alone. Luke wasn't the perfect husband she thought he'd be. He had cheated on her. He had abandoned her. And now, without him, she was looking for the next best option. And that option was me. After I told my mother to go to hell and hung up, the floodgates opened. Calls, texts, voicemails. My father left me a long message about how this was my chance to prove I was the bigger man. You always prided yourself on being the responsible one, Ashley, he said. This is your opportunity to show what kind of man you really are. Julie's parents sent me messages too, begging me to at least consider talking to her. Julie knows she made a mistake, her mother wrote. She's been miserable without you. You were always the best thing in her life, and we'd love to see you two rebuild what you had. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Where was this concern when I was the one suffering? Where were all these calls when I was sitting in an empty apartment, trying to figure out how to keep going after being abandoned by everyone? But now that Julie had been humiliated, now that she was suffering, suddenly I mattered again. Suddenly, I wasn't disposable anymore. I had ignored every message. I had blocked every number. But then, an unknown number flashed on my screen one evening, and without thinking, I picked up. And it was her. Julie. Ashley, she breathed, as if she was relieved to hear my voice. I was hoping you'd pick up. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my mind racing with every horrible memory I had tried so hard to bury. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I nearly laughed. Sorry? Now? She kept talking, her voice soft, measured, like she had rehearsed this speech 100 times before. I know I hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Luke is gone. He left, Ashley. He just walked out one day, and I haven't seen him since. I clenched my jaw, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. And I finally said. She hesitated, then sighed. I miss you. There it was. Not, I regret what I did. Not, I wish I had never hurt you. Just, I miss you. Like I was some object she had misplaced, and now that she had lost Luke, she wanted to dig me out of storage and put me back in my place. You miss me? I echoed, my voice ice cold. She sniffled. I do. I was stupid, Ashley. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I thought Luke was the better man, but he wasn't. He left me. He didn't care. But you? You always cared. Her words made me feel sick. This wasn't an apology. This was desperation. Luke had left her. She had no one. And now she was trying to crawl back like I was some safety net she had abandoned and suddenly needed again. Julie, I said, keeping my voice steady, do you know what the hardest part of all this was? She went silent. I continued. It wasn't the fact that you cheated on me. It wasn't even the fact that you did it with my brother. She inhaled sharply. It was the fact that when I needed my family, when I needed you, you all threw me away like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. She started to say something, but I didn't let her. And now that Luke has done the same thing to you, you suddenly understand what that feels like. And it hurts, doesn't it? Silence. Well, Julie, I continued, I don't feel sorry for you. I don't forgive you. And I will never, ever be your backup plan. Then I hung up. And this time, I blocked her for good. The next morning, my father called again. Ashley, he said, his voice full of forced patience, you need to rethink this. Julie is willing to make amends. Don't you think this is a sign? A chance to rebuild what was lost? I exhaled, shaking my head. Dad, let me ask you something. If Luke hadn't left her, would you be making this call? Silence. Would you have reached out to me if Julie and Luke were still happily together? More silence. Then, finally, he sighed. Ashley, don't be petty. Family forgives. That was the last straw. Then maybe you should have told that to Luke and Julie before they destroyed mine. And with that, I hung up. I blocked his number. Then I sat there, staring at my phone, waiting to feel something. Guilt, sadness, maybe even regret. But I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just peace. Because for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. Blocking my father should have felt like a big moment, like some dramatic final act that put an end to all of this. But the truth is, these people don't give up easily. Not when they need something from you. And right now, I was the only thing holding their perfect little world together. They had already lost Luke, and Julie was on the verge of a public humiliation. If I didn't come back, if I didn't save her, then they would have to face something they had spent their entire lives avoiding. The consequences of their actions. 2 days after I blocked my father, I got an email from my mother. Subject, let's talk. The message itself was short, but every word was designed to manipulate me. Ashley, I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I understand that you're hurting, and I truly am sorry for how things happened. But you can't just cut us off like this. We are still your family. Please, don't do something you'll regret. Come home and talk to us. Love. Mom. I stared at the message for a long time. Still my family? Where was this family when I was falling apart? Where was this love when they were celebrating my wife and brother's marriage, pretending like I had never existed? Nowhere. They didn't care when I was suffering. They only cared now because it was convenient for them. I didn't reply. Ignoring them should have been the end of it. But my family doesn't handle rejection well. The next day, I came home from work and found both of my parents standing outside my apartment building. They had tracked me down. I froze in place, gripping my keys so tightly they dug into my palm. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and walking away, pretending I didn't see them, but I knew they wouldn't stop. So I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked right up to them. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice level. My mother clasped her hands together. Ashley, please, just talk to us. No. Her face crumbled. You can't mean that. We're your family. There was that word again. Family. I let out a bitter laugh. You lost the right to call yourselves my family the second you chose them over me. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. Son, you need to stop being so stubborn. This isn't just about you. Yes, it is. I cut him off. For once in my life, this is about me. He scoffed. Julie is suffering, Ashley. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I clenched my jaw, trying to control the rage boiling inside me. No, it doesn't. She made a mistake, my mother pleaded, and now she realizes it. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her? I took a slow breath. Then, I looked my mother directly in the eyes and said something I never thought I'd say. I don't have a heart when it comes to any of you anymore. She gasped like I had physically struck her. My father stepped forward, his expression dark. That's enough. We didn't raise you to be cruel. I smiled coldly. No, you raised me to be a doormat. And I'm done playing that role. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and slammed it in their faces. That was the last time I ever saw them. The final attempt to pull me back came about a week later. I was sitting in my apartment, enjoying the silence for the first time in what felt like months, when my phone rang. It was a new number. I had a feeling I knew who it was. And I was right. Julie. At first, I considered ignoring it, letting her words fade into the void where they belonged. But then I remembered something. I deserved to have the last word. So I answered. Ashley, she breathed, her voice shaking. Please, don't hang up. I didn't say anything. I don't know what to do. Her voice cracked. I miss you so much. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. I stayed silent, waiting. She took a deep breath. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't take it back. But don't you think we deserve a second chance? There it was. That one tiny thread of hope she was clinging to. She still believed there was a version of this story where I forgave her, where I took her back. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then, I spoke. No. She let out a soft sob. Ashley, please. I can't do this without you. I smiled to myself, because I had finally realized the truth. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she did. She was crying because she was alone. She wasn't sorry for hurting me. She was sorry that she didn't win. And that wasn't my problem. Goodbye, Julie. Then I hung up, and I blocked her for the last time. That was the final chapter of their story in my life. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. No more guilt. No more anger. Just peace. They had destroyed me, but I had rebuilt myself without them. And no matter how many times they called, no matter how many ways they tried to drag me back, they would never, ever be part of my life again. When I blocked Julie's number for the last time, I expected some kind of final wave of emotions, anger, relief, maybe even sadness. But instead, I felt nothing. Not empty, not bitter, not even triumphant. Just done. Like I had finally closed a book I should have never picked up in the first place. After that final call, the messages from my family slowed down. I think they finally got the message. Or maybe they just found some new distraction to latch onto. Either way, I didn't care. I had spent my entire life bending over backward for them, trying to be the perfect son, the reliable one, the one who was always there no matter what. And for what? So they could throw me away the moment I wasn't useful to them? Not anymore. I wasn't going to be their backup plan. I wasn't going to be their doormat. And I definitely wasn't going to waste another second trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. They made their choice. And now, I had made mine. It's been over a year since I cut them all off. And in that time, I've rebuilt everything they took from me. I moved into a new apartment, a place that was mine. No memories of Julie. No remnants of my past life. Just a blank slate. I started traveling, something I had always wanted to do but never had the freedom for. I took trips with friends, visited places I had only ever seen in pictures. For the first time, I was living for myself, not for my family, not for anyone else's expectations. Just me. And I don't think I've ever been happier. Looking back, I realize now that losing them was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because in losing them, I found myself. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who actually stands by you. I learned that forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned. And none of them deserved it. But most of all, I learned that I was never the problem. They had spent years making me feel less than, like I was never good enough, like Luke would always be better than me in their eyes. But the truth is, Luke was a coward. Julie was a user. And my parents? They were nothing without someone to control. I was never disposable. They just couldn't handle the fact that I refused to be used anymore. I don't know where Julie is now. I don't know if Luke ever came back. And I don't care. I blocked every number. I cut off every toxic tie. And for the first time in my entire life, I am free. Because I chose myself. And that's a choice I will never, ever regret. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this. You don't owe anyone a place in your life just because you share DNA. You don't have to forgive people just because they suddenly realize they need you. And you never have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Because at the end of the day, the people who truly love you will never make you prove your worth to them. They will choose you every time. And if they don't, walk away. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, is lonelier than being surrounded by people who only love you when it's convenient.